summer, 1993, the kind of summer that made people believe in God again. Oregon's Crater Lake sat nestled in the collapsed caldera of an ancient volcano, its waters so impossibly blue they seemed painted onto the landscape by an artist who'd never learned subtlety. Tourists came from across the country to stand at the rim and stare down into that sapphire mirror, 2,000 feet deep in places, cold enough to kill you in minutes if you fell in. But nobody fell in. Not accidentally, anyway. The Hargrove family had driven up from Sacramento in their burgundy Oldsmobile station wagon, the kind with fake wood paneling on the sides that screamed Middle America. Dale Hargrove, 42, worked as an insurance adjuster. His wife, Patricia, taught 3rd grade. Their daughter, Emma, had just turned 15 and spent most of the drive with headphones on, listening to a Walkman that played the same Nirvana tape on repeat. Their son, Liam, was 11 years old, small for his age, with a gap between his front teeth and a constellation of freckles across his nose that darkened in the summer sun. Liam collected things. Rocks, mostly. Mostly, ejodiul-1C, interesting ones. He had a shoebox under his bed filled with geodes, fool's gold, a chunk of obsidian he'd found near Mount Shasta. He kept a notebook where he drew pictures of each rock and wrote down where he'd found it, the date. Sometimes a story about what he imagined the rock had seen before he'd picked it up. His father thought it was weird. His mother thought it was sweet. Emma thought he was a dork but secretly kept one of the rocks he'd given her, a smooth piece of rose quartz, in her backpack at all times. They arrived at Crater Lake on July 19th, a Monday. The parking lot at Rim Village was half full, families spilling out of minivans, couples taking photographs, little a group of college students passing around a joint behind the visitor center when they thought nobody was looking. The air smelled like pine and volcanic stone and something else, something mineral and old that rose up from the lake itself. Patricia spread out a blanket near the rim while Dale unloaded their cooler. Emma wandered off immediately, camera in hand, seeking the perfect shot for her photography class project. Liam stood at the edge, hands shoved in the pockets of his denim shorts, staring down at the water. "It's so blue," he said to nobody in particular. His mother came up beside him, put a hand on his shoulder. "They say it's the purest water in North America. But no rivers flow in or out, just rain and snow, filtered through volcanic rock for thousands of years. Can you swim in it?" "Technically, yes, but it's very cold, honey. But even in summer." Liam nodded but kept staring. Something about the lake called to him in a way he couldn't articulate. It wasn't just beautiful. It was alive somehow. Watchful. Watchful. They ate lunch. Sandwiches, potato chips, warm soda from the cooler. Dale told bad jokes that made Patricia roll her eyes and Emma groan. Liam picked at his food, kept glancing back toward the rim. After lunch, Dale announced he was going to hike the Garfield Peak Trail. Patricia wanted to visit the visitor center and learn about the geology. Emma was already gone, disappeared down one of the trails with her camera, and had left Liam alone with his thoughts and the lake. "Stay where I can see you," Patricia called over her shoulder as she walked toward the stone building that housed the exhibits. Liam waved without turning around. He stood at the rim for a long time, just watching. The water was so still it looked solid, like blue glass you could walk across. A few boats moved across the surface far below, tour vessels taking visitors out to Wizard Island, the volcanic comb that rose from the center of the lake like a witch's hat. That's when he saw it. Down below, along the rocky shoreline, something glinted in the sun. Just a flash there and gone, but enough to catch his attention. Liam squinted. There it was again. Something metallic, something that didn't belong. He looked around. His mother had disappeared into the visitor center. His father was somewhere up on the trail. Emma was off being a moody teenager. Nobody was watching. The trail down to the shoreline wasn't marked, but it existed. A narrow path worn by decades of feet that weren't supposed to be there. People who wanted to touch the water despite the signs asking them not to. Liam found the trailhead hidden behind a cluster of hemlock trees and started down. It was steeper than it looked. Loose gravel slid under his sneakers, and twice he had to grab onto scraggly bushes to keep from tumbling. The temperature dropped as he descended, the sun blocked by the rim high above. By the time he reached the shoreline, he was breathing hard and his palms were scratched. But he'd found it. The object that had glinted in the sun sat wedged between two rocks at the water's edge. A pocket watch, tarnished silver, attached to a chain that disappeared into a crack in the volcanic stone. Liam picked it up carefully, his heart hammering with the thrill of discovery. The watch was beautiful. Ornate engravings covered the case, swirling patterns that might have been flowers or might have been something else, something older. He pressed the release and the cover popped open. The face was yellowed with age, the Roman numerals still visible, the hands frozen at 317. No, wait. Liam held the watch closer. The second hand was moving. Tick, tick, tick. Impossibly, the watch was still running. He should have run then. Should have dropped the watch and scrambled back up the trail to safety, to his mother, to the boring predictability of their family vacation. But he was 11, and the watch was the most amazing thing he'd ever found, and the story he would write in his notebook about this discovery was already forming in his mind. He sat down on the rocks to examine the watch more carefully. The chain was longer than he'd thought, several feet of it coiled in the crack. He pulled gently, felt resistance, pulled harder. The chain came free with a grinding sound of metal on stone. That's when the water changed. It was subtle at first. The color shifted just slightly from sapphire to something darker. Bolt, midnight. The stillness that had made the surface look like glass began to ripple, concentric circles spreading out from a point about 20 feet from shore. Liam looked up from the watch. Something was rising. Mine says, not breaking the surface, not yet, but coming up from below. A shape, a shadow, enormous and slow-moving and utterly wrong. The temperature plummeted. Liam's breath came out in visible puffs. Frost formed on the rocks around him, spreading like a time-lapse video of winter arriving. The watch in his hand grew hot, almost burning, the ticking growing louder, faster, urgent. He should have run. He stood up instead, transfixed by the thing rising toward him through water that was supposed to be empty, that was supposed to contain nothing but trout and the occasional salamander. The shadow grew larger, darker, taking on definition. Not a shape he recognized, not anything that should exist. And then it stopped. 15 feet down, maybe. Close enough that Liam could see it wasn't one thing but many things, a writhing mass of something that his brain refused to process properly. He felt dizzy. The watch burned his palm, but he couldn't drop it, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare. A voice called from above. Liam, where are you? His mother was looking for him. The spell broke. Liam spun away from the water, the watch clutched in his fist, and started scrambling back up the trail. His sneakers slipped on loose rock. He fell, caught himself, kept climbing. But behind him, he heard something surface with a sound like a sigh, like the earth itself exhaling. He didn't look back. He was halfway up the trail when he realized he still had the watch. He should throw it away, toss it into the trees, let it disappear. But his collector's instinct was too strong, and the watch was still ticking, still warm, still somehow alive in his hand. Liam shoved it deep into his pocket and kept climbing. He emerged from the tree line breathless and pale, legs shaking. Patricia was standing by their blanket, shading her eyes as she scanned the rim. She spotted him and her face flooded with relief, then anger. Where were you? I told you to stay where I could see you. I'm sorry, I went to look at some rocks, I didn't mean to. She studied his face, and he watched her anger dissolve into concern. Honey, you look terrible. Are you feeling okay? I'm fine. Just it's hot. You are shivering. He was. Despite the July sun beating down on the rim, he was shaking like he'd been swimming in ice water. Patricia pressed the back of her hand to his forehead. "You are burning up. Oh, sweetheart, we need to get you back to the hotel." Liam didn't argue. He let his mother guide him to the car, let her explain to Dale when he returned from his hike that they needed to leave early, let Emma complain about cutting the trip short. He sat in the back seat during the 3-hour drive to their hotel in Klamath Falls, the pocket watch heavy in his shorts, ticking steadily against his thigh. Tick, tick, tick. That night, in a motel room that smelled like cigarettes and industrial cleaner, Liam's fever spiked to 104. Patricia wanted to take him to the emergency room, but the fever broke around midnight, and by morning he seemed better. Tired, pale, but better. "Probably just heat exhaustion," Dale said, already calculating whether they could salvage the vacation or should just head home. They went home. Liam slept most of the drive, curled up in the back seat with his head on his sister's shoulder. Emma complained but didn't push him away. In his pocket, invisible to his family, the watch kept ticking. Back in Sacramento, life resumed its normal rhythms. Dale went back to work. Patricia prepared for the upcoming school year. Emma started her sophomore year of high school. Liam went to 6th grade, made new friends, joined the science club. But he wasn't the same. He stopped collecting rocks. The shoebox under his bed gathered dust. His notebook, previously filled with careful drawings and observations, sat unopened. But when Patricia asked him about it, he just shrugged and said he'd gotten interested in other things. And that was technically true. Liam had become obsessed with water. He spent hours in the bathtub, letting the water rise until it covered his ears, listening to the muffled sounds of the house above. He stared at puddles after rainstorms, watching the way light moved across their surfaces. At school, he volunteered to water the plants in his classroom, and took so long doing it that his teacher started to worry. "Is everything okay at home?" she asked his mother during a parent-teacher conference in October. "I think so," Patricia said, but doubt crept into her voice. "He has been acting a little odd since our vacation." And odd was an understatement. Liam had started sleepwalking. Patricia would find him standing in the bathroom at 2 in the morning, staring at the mirror, water running in the sink. Once, Dale caught him trying to go outside in his pajamas, walking toward the backyard pool like a zombie. They took him to a doctor. The doctor prescribed medication for anxiety, suggested therapy. Liam dutifully swallowed his pills and sat through sessions with a therapist who had too many plants in her office and asked him to draw his feelings. He drew water. Always water. Waves, rivers, lakes, oceans. The therapist thought it was symbolic. She wrote in her notes that Liam was processing emotional depth, learning to navigate his feelings, metaphors and symbols typical of his developmental stage. She was wrong. Warren. The pocket watch sat in Liam's sock drawer, wrapped in an old t-shirt. He never took it out, never showed anyone, but he was aware of it constantly. He could hear it ticking even when he was in another room, even when the drawer was closed and he was supposedly asleep. Tick, tick, tick. Winter came. Sacramento's version of winter, which meant rain and temperatures in the 50s, everyone acting like it was the end of the world. Liam turned 12 in December. His parents threw him a party, invited his classmates, ordered pizza and a cake shaped like a soccer ball, because he'd briefly played soccer 2 years ago, and they hadn't updated their understanding of his interests. Liam smiled through the party, opened his presents, blew out his candles. And that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, he took the watch out of his drawer. It was heavier than he remembered. The engravings on the case had changed, he was sure of it. And the patterns were different, more intricate, almost moving in the dim light from his nightstand lamp. He opened it. No, the hands still showed 3:17, but now the watch showed a date too, numbers that had definitely not been there before, etched into the yellowed face. July 19th, 1993, the day he'd found it, the day everything had changed. Liam closed the watch carefully and put it back in his drawer. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking that nobody else could hear. Sleep didn't come easily anymore. When it did, he dreamed of water, of depths, of things moving in darkness, patient and old and waiting. Spring arrived. Liam's 12th birthday became his 13th. His 13th became his 14th. High school loomed. Emma graduated and left for college at UC Berkeley, suddenly absent from the dinner table, from the bathroom they'd shared, from his life in all the small ways he hadn't appreciated until she was gone. Patricia noticed her son had grown thin. Not unhealthy, the doctor assured her, just lean. A growth spurt, perfectly normal. But there was something else, something she couldn't name. Liam's eyes had changed. They'd always been hazel, light brown with flecks of green. Now they looked darker, deeper, like looking into water instead of eyes. "Are you sleeping okay?" she asked him one morning over breakfast. "Yeah, fine," he lied. He wasn't sleeping. Not really. He existed in a strange in-between state, his body in bed, his mind somewhere else entirely. Somewhere cold and vast and ancient. Every night, the dreams grew more vivid, more real. He walked through underwater forests, stone pillars covered in algae older than humanity, saw things that his waking mind couldn't hold on to, but that left him hollow with terror. And always, always he could hear the ticking. The summer he turned 15, his parents announced another vacation. It is a return to Oregon, to the coast this time, not the mountains. Liam felt his stomach drop. "Can I stay home?" he asked. "Don't be silly," Dale said. "Family vacation means the whole family." Liam didn't argue. He'd learned that arguing only led to questions, and questions led to lies, and he was so tired of lying. He packed his bag mechanically, tossed in clothes without looking at them, and at the last moment, wrapped the pocket watch in a sock and buried it at the bottom. He couldn't leave it behind. It wouldn't let him. They drove north on Highway 5, the same route they'd taken 2 years earlier, past Redding, past Mount Shasta with its snow-capped peak visible from 100 miles away, into Oregon where the landscape turned greener, wetter, more alive. But they weren't going to Crater Lake this time. They were heading to the coast, to a rental house in a town called Bayshore, population 800, the kind of place that existed on charm and tourism and nothing else. Except and you. As they drove past the turnoff for Crater Lake, Liam felt the watch pulse in his bag. A single strong tick, different from all the others, resonant enough that he gasped. "You okay back there?" Patricia asked. "Fine. Just carsick." And they kept driving. The pulse faded. But Liam knew with absolute certainty that the watch had recognized where they were, had known, had remembered. That night, in the rental house that smelled like mildew and ocean salt, Liam lay awake listening to the waves crash against the rocks below. The bedroom window faced the Pacific, and through it he could see the moon hanging low over water that stretched to infinity. The watch sat on the nightstand beside him, its case gleaming silver in the moonlight. He picked it up without thinking, opened it without meaning to. The hands had moved. No longer 3:17. Now they showed 11:43. He glanced at the digital clock on the nightstand. Big 11:43 exactly. The watch was keeping time. Real time. And after 2 years of being frozen at the moment he'd found it, the watch had suddenly decided to work. Liam felt his pulse quicken. He sat up, swung his legs out of bed. Through the window, the ocean called to him. Not metaphorically, actually called. He could hear his name in the waves, in the rhythm of water against stone. "Liam, Liam, come see, come home." He stood up. His legs moved without his permission, carrying him toward the door. He needed to stop. He knew he needed to stop. His mind was screaming warnings, but his body wouldn't listen. The watch in his hand grew warm, the ticking synchronized with his heartbeat. His hand reached for the doorknob. Footsteps in the hall. Patricia, unable to sleep in the unfamiliar bed, getting up for a glass of water. She opened Liam's door to check on him, the way she still did sometimes even though he was 15 and practically an adult. She found him standing in the middle of the room, face blank, eyes dark and depthless, the silver pocket watch hanging from his hand. "Liam?" He blinked. Awareness flooded back, and with it terror. He looked at his mother, looked at the watch, looked at the open window with its view of the waiting ocean. "Mum," he whispered. "Something's wrong with me." Patricia guided him back to bed, took the watch from his hand. She studied it in the lamplight, confused by this object she'd never seen before, wondering where it had come from and why her son was holding it like a talisman. "Where did you get this?" Liam's mouth opened. The truth sat on his tongue, desperate to come out. He wanted to tell her everything. The lake, the thing in the water, the dreams, the feeling that something vast and patient had been waiting for him his entire life and had finally found him that day on the shore. But the watch ticked once in her hand, loud as a gunshot, and Liam's mouth closed. The words died unspoken. "I found it," he said instead, flat, emotionless. Patricia wanted to press, but her son looked so exhausted, so haunted, that maternal instinct overrode curiosity. She put the watch on the dresser across the room, far from his bed, and smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "We will talk about this in the morning. Get some sleep. Mun." She kissed his forehead and left, closing the door behind her. In the darkness, Liam lay very still, listening. The watch ticked on the dresser. The ocean murmured beyond the window, and underneath both sounds, so faint he might have imagined it, he heard laughter, patient and cold and certain. 3 nights later, Liam Hargrove disappeared. His mother found his bed empty at 6:30 in the morning, covers thrown back, window open. His shoes were gone. So was the pocket watch. Patricia called the police immediately, and within hours search parties were combing the beaches, the cliffs, the rocky tidal pools where the Pacific met the land. They found his shoes 3 hours later, placed neatly on a flat rock overlooking the water. No signs of a struggle. No footprints leading away. Just the shoes, empty and waiting, and beyond them, the ocean stretching to the horizon. The official report listed Liam Hargrove as a probable drowning. The unofficial whispers in Bayshore spoke of suicide, of a troubled teenager who'd walked into the waves at dawn and let them take him. His family refused to believe it. Not Liam. Not their son. Not their son. But the ocean kept its secrets, and after 3 weeks of searching, the case went cold. The Hargroves returned to Sacramento, minus 1 child, to a house that echoed with absence. They kept Liam's room exactly as he'd left it, just in case. Just in case he came home. He didn't. 2 years passed. Emma finished college, got married, had children of her own. Dale died of a heart attack in 2003. Patricia moved to a smaller house, packed up her son's belongings, placed them in storage. She never stopped believing he was alive somewhere. Never stopped waiting for the phone call, the knock on the door, the miracle that would bring her boy home. 2004 came and went, and the world kept turning. New tragedies replaced old ones in the news cycle. Liam Hargrove became a footnote, another name on a missing persons list that nobody looked at anymore, until the divers went down. 11 years after Liam Hargrove walked into the Pacific Ocean and vanished, a team of technical divers received permission to explore a restricted section of Crater Lake. The date was August 6, 2004. A Saturday. Hot enough that tourists packed the rim, cameras clicking, children complaining about the heat, their parents promising ice cream if everyone could just appreciate the natural wonder for 5 more minutes. The dive team consisted of 4 people. Michael Brennan, 47, ex-Navy with 300 logged dives and a reputation for keeping his cool in situations that would make other divers surface screaming. Katie Fong, 32, a marine biologist from Portland who'd been studying the lake's unique ecosystem for 6 years. Raymond Ortiz, 51, photographer and documentarian there to capture footage for a Nature Channel special about extreme environments. And Jennifer Hale, 29, the rookie of the group, certified for technical diving but new to depths below 200 feet. They weren't looking for anything specific. The dive was part of a geological survey, mapping the lake bottom, taking samples of sediment, documenting the underwater landscape that few people had ever seen. Crater Lake held mysteries. Strange thermal vents that shouldn't exist, ancient trees preserved in the cold water, standing upright on the lake floor like a drowned forest. Reports, never confirmed, of unusual formations deep in the caldera that didn't match known geological patterns. The team entered the water at 9:15 in the morning from a research vessel anchored near Wizard Island. The surface temperature was pleasant, almost warm after the scorching air above. But that warmth disappeared quickly. By 50 feet, the water was cold enough to hurt. By 100 feet, visibility began to decrease despite the lake's famous clarity. By 200 feet, they were in a world of blue darkness, their lights cutting narrow tunnels through water that pressed against them like something alive. Michael's voice crackled through the underwater communication system they were testing, a new prototype that allowed them to talk to each other and the surface support team. Pressure check. Everyone doing okay? 3 confirmations came back. They descended further, following the volcanic rock face down into depths that would kill them if they ascended too quickly, if their equipment failed, if they made one wrong decision. At 350 feet, Raymond's camera lights swept across something that made him stop. Hold up. I'm seeing something unusual here. 11 o'clock, about 30 yards out. The team adjusted their trajectory, swimming toward whatever Raymond had spotted. The formation emerged from the darkness slowly, and Katie's breath caught in her throat despite her training, despite her scientific detachment. It looked like a doorway. Not natural. Couldn't be natural. 2 pillars of dark volcanic stone. Perfectly vertical, too perfectly vertical, supporting a lintel that had been carved with patterns that hurt to look at directly. Beyond the doorway, deeper darkness, a space that their lights couldn't penetrate fully. This isn't on any of the surveys, Michael said, his voice carefully neutral. Katie, any chance this is a natural formation? Katie swam closer, her scientist's mind cataloging details while her gut screamed at her to turn around. No, absolutely not. This is artificial. But that's impossible. This lake is 7,000 years old. Who would build something like this? How? Unless you're a Gurden. Maybe it's from before the collapse, Jennifer suggested, her voice thin with awe or fear or both. Maybe it was on the mountain before the eruption. Then it should be buried under hundreds of feet of pumice and ash, Katie countered. This looks like it was placed here yesterday. Raymond was already filming, his camera capturing every angle. We need to go in. We have to document this. Leash and Michael hesitated. They were at the edge of their depth limits, consuming air that couldn't be replaced, dealing with nitrogen narcosis that made thinking difficult. Protocol said they should mark the location, surface, report the find, and return with better equipment and a larger team. The protocol was very clear. But they were also scientists and explorers, and this was the kind of discovery that happened once in a lifetime, if that. 15 minutes, Michael decided. We go in, we look around, we get out. Nobody goes out of sight of the entrance. Understood? They understood. The 4 divers passed through the doorway single file, light sweeping through space that shouldn't exist. The chamber beyond was large, maybe 50 feet across, the ceiling lost in darkness above them. The walls were covered in more of those painful patterns, geometric and organic at the same time, definitely carved by intelligent hands, even if those hands hadn't been human. The floor was smooth, unnaturally smooth, and scattered across it, like offerings at an altar, were objects. There's dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe. Personal effects from different eras. A child's doll from the 1800s, its porcelain face cracked but intact. A leather boot, Civil War era based on the style. Jewelry. Coins. Photographs in waterproof cases, the faces of the people in them faded but still visible, still human, still real. A teddy bear. A wedding ring. A pocket knife with someone's initials carved into the handle. What is this place? Jennifer whispered, and nobody had an answer. Katie swam lower, examining the objects without touching them. Each one had been placed deliberately, arranged in patterns that suggested ritual significance, meaning. She documented with her own camera, hands shaking inside her gloves. That's when Raymond found the pocket watch. It sat by itself on a raised section of stone, spotlighted by his camera's beam like it had been waiting for this exact moment. Silver, tarnished, attached to a chain that coiled beside it. Beautiful and terrible and obviously still functional because they could all hear it, even through the water, even through their equipment. Ticking. Action. That's not possible, Michael said flatly. A mechanical watch can't work underwater at this depth. The pressure alone would crush it. But it was ticking. They could all hear it. Tick, 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 steady as a heartbeat, impossible as a dream. Raymond reached for it. Katie grabbed his wrist. Don't. We don't know what this place is. We shouldn't touch anything. It's a watch, Katie. I'm not robbing a tomb. I'm collecting evidence. Evidence of what? We don't even know what we are looking at here. But Raymond had already pulled free, his hand closing around the watch. The moment he touched it, something changed. The water temperature dropped so fast that their suits couldn't compensate. The patterns on the walls began to glow, faint bioluminescence that definitely hadn't been there before, definitely wasn't natural. And from deeper in the chamber, from a passage they hadn't noticed before, something started moving toward them. Michael's training kicked in. Out. Now. Everyone out now. They didn't argue. They turned and kicked toward the doorway, but the distance had changed somehow, stretched. The entrance that should have been 20 feet away now looked like it was 100. The water grew thicker, resistant, like swimming through gel. Jennifer glanced back. She shouldn't have. She knew the rules, knew you never looked back, but instinct overrode training and she looked. Later, in the hospital where they treated her for severe decompression sickness and psychological trauma, she would try to describe what she'd seen. The psychiatrist wrote it off as nitrogen narcosis, hallucination brought on by depth and pressure and fear. But Jennifer knew what she'd seen. Knew it with the certainty of nightmare made real. Something vast moving through the darkness. Not swimming. Flowing. A shape without definite edges, containing multitudes, ancient beyond measure and aware, oh God, aware of them. She'd seen what might have been eyes or might have been something worse. Points of intelligence that held no humanity, no mercy, nothing but patient hunger. Michael grabbed her, dragged her through the doorway, and suddenly the resistance vanished. They were back in normal water, cold but not impossible, dark but navigable. Behind them, the doorway pulsed once with that painful light and then went dark. And they ascended too fast. They knew they were ascending too fast, but stopping wasn't an option, not with whatever was down there. Not with Raymond clutching the watch like it was the most important thing in the world, not with Jennifer sobbing through her regulator. They broke protocol, skipped decompression stops they shouldn't have skipped, and surfaced after 40 minutes in a state of near panic. The support team pulled them onto the boat, already calling for medical evacuation. All 4 divers were bent, nitrogen bubbles forming in their blood, joints screaming, vision blurring. They were rushed to a hospital in Klamath Falls where a hyperbaric chamber could treat them, could maybe save them from permanent injury or death. 3 of them survived with minimal lasting damage. Michael had some joint pain he'd carry forever. Katie developed migraines. Jennifer's hearing was permanently affected, a constant ringing in her left ear. Raymond Ortiz died 3 days after the dive, his body ravaged by decompression sickness, despite aggressive treatment. But before he died, in moments of lucidity between the pain and the medication, he kept trying to tell them something. About the watch. About voices he could hear. About a boy who'd been waiting underwater for 11 years. The medical staff thought he was delirious. The other divers weren't sure. But they did know that when Raymond's belongings were collected from the hospital, the pocket watch wasn't among them. Nobody could remember seeing it after they'd surfaced. Nobody knew what had happened to it. The dive footage told a different story. Michael reviewed it weeks later, after he'd recovered enough to function, after the official reports had been filed and the investigation into Raymond's death had concluded. He sat in his home office, door locked, and watched the footage frame by frame. The watch was there on the stone. Raymond reached for it. Raymond picked it up. They fled the chamber. But then, in the chaos of the ascent, in the panic and the darkness, something happened. Michael paused the footage, rewound, watched again. Raymond's hand was empty. The watch was gone. But nobody had taken it from him. It had simply vanished between one frame and the next, there and then not there, as if it had never existed at all. Except Michael knew it had existed. He'd seen it. He'd heard it ticking. He spent 3 days watching the footage, making notes, trying to make sense of what they'd found. The chamber, the objects, the thing that had moved toward them. And finally, inevitably, he started researching the items they'd documented. From the pocket knife with the initials, the wedding ring, the photographs, each one connected to a disappearance, sometimes from decades ago, sometimes from the previous century. A logger who'd vanished in 1873, a newlywed couple who'd never returned from their honeymoon in 1920, or a girl who'd gone swimming and never come back in 1965. All of them at Crater Lake, all of them presumed drowned, none of them ever found. Michael's search led him eventually to a database of missing persons, and that's where he found Liam Hargrove. Missing since 1998, last seen in Bayshore, Oregon. Probable drowning. Case closed. But Michael read deeper, found the family's statement that Liam had visited Crater Lake just 2 years before he disappeared. Found a detail in the police report that mentioned a silver pocket watch had gone missing from Liam's possessions. Never recovered. Never explained. He sat back in his chair, hands shaking. The watch they'd found was Liam's. Somehow, impossibly. The boy had vanished into the Pacific, but his watch had ended up 350 feet down in Crater Lake, still ticking, still keeping time, still waiting. Michael tried to tell himself it was coincidence, that different watch. Similar description, but his mind making connections that weren't there. But he'd seen too much, had been to places where normal explanations didn't hold, where reality bent around mysteries that nobody could solve. He called Katie. She didn't answer. He tried Jennifer. She'd moved back to Ohio, changed her number. He had no way to reach her. Finally, he called the National Park Service, asked to speak to someone about the dive, about what they'd found. The ranger he spoke to was polite but firm. There was no record of any anomalous formations in Crater Lake. The dive team had reported finding some interesting geological features, yes, but nothing unusual, nothing artificial, and certainly nothing that warranted further investigation. But we documented everything, Michael insisted. And the footage, the photographs, the measurements. I'm sure you did. Unfortunately, we don't have access to those files. If you'd like to submit your findings through the proper channels, there's a process for that. Michael tried. He submitted reports. He sent emails. He called offices and left messages that never got returned. It was like shouting into a void. Nobody wanted to hear about the chamber. Nobody wanted to know about the artifacts. Or somebody knew and didn't want anyone else to find out. 6 months after the dive, Michael received a visitor. A man in his 60s wearing a suit that was too nice for a casual visit, carrying a briefcase that looked expensive. He introduced himself as a consultant for the Department of the Interior, which meant nothing and everything. They sat in Michael's living room and didn't talk about anything important for 15 minutes. Weather, diving, Michael's Navy background. Then the man opened his briefcase and pulled out a document. I need you to sign this, he said. It's a standard non-disclosure agreement regarding your dive last August. There's nothing standard about what we found. I'm aware. That's why I need you to sign. Michael read the document carefully. It was thorough. If he signed, he would agree never to discuss the dive publicly, never to share footage or photographs, never to write about or reference the discoveries they'd made. Violation would result in legal action and possible criminal charges. What if I don't sign? The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then we will have a very different conversation. One that involves national security concerns, questions about the reliability of your memory, perhaps some issues with your dive certifications. It would be unfortunate. Messy, better for everyone if you just sign. Michael thought about fighting, about refusing, about going public with everything he knew. But he was tired, and the man across from him radiated the kind of authority that didn't come from a title but from knowing exactly how much power he wielded. And he signed. Naisen. The man thanked him, collected the document, and stood to leave. At the door he paused. For what it's worth, you did the right thing coming back up. That place, that's not for people like us. Some things are meant to stay buried. What is it? Michael asked. What did we find down there? Something older than the lake. Older than the mountain. Older than us. The man adjusted his tie. And it's still hungry. He left. Michael never saw him again. Never heard from him. The NDA remained in effect, and he kept his mouth shut because prison wasn't appealing and because part of him, the part that had felt that presence in the darkness, understood that some truths were dangerous. Katie Fong signed her NDA 3 days later. Jennifer Hale signed hers without reading it, just wanted the whole thing to be over. Raymond Ortiz couldn't sign anything because he was dead, but his footage was confiscated anyway, labeled classified, but disappeared into whatever black hole the government used for things it didn't want people to know about. The chamber in Crater Lake was declared off limits. No further dives would be authorized. The geological survey was completed using sonar and remote equipment that couldn't see what human eyes could see, couldn't feel what human minds could feel. Life moved on. Years passed. Michael retired from diving, took a job teaching scuba certification courses to tourists. Katie continued her research on less controversial aspects of lake ecology. Jennifer got married, had kids, tried not to think about the things she'd seen moving through the darkness. But none of them forgot. And sometimes, late at night when sleep wouldn't come, Michael would think about the watch. Still ticking. Still keeping time. Still waiting for someone to find it again, to take it, to complete whatever cycle it was bound to. He thought about Liam Hargrove, missing since 1998. Presumed dead. Case closed. He wondered if the boy was really gone, or if he was somewhere else, somewhere impossible, somewhere that existed in the spaces between water and stone and time. He wondered if Liam could hear the ticking too, if it haunted him the way it haunted Michael, if the sound of that steady rhythm was a promise or a threat. Tick, 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 tick. In Sacramento, Patricia Hargrove was 71 years old, living alone in a retirement community, keeping her son's photograph on her nightstand. She'd never stopped waiting, never stopped believing. But hope was a difficult thing to maintain after 16 years, and some nights she allowed herself to imagine that Liam was at peace, that wherever he'd gone he wasn't suffering. She was wrong about that. On a Tuesday in October 2009, Patricia received a package. No return address. Postmarked from Crater Lake, Oregon. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper that smelled like mineral water and volcanic stone, was a silver pocket watch. Her hands shook as she unwrapped it. She recognized it immediately. Her son's watch. And the one that had gone missing. The one that had never been found. Patricia opened the case with trembling fingers. The face was yellowed, the hands frozen at 3:17, the date etched below showing July 19, 1993. The day they'd visited Crater Lake. The day everything had started to go wrong. She held it to her ear. Silence. The watch was stopped, dead, just a piece of metal and old craftsmanship with no magic, no mystery, no answers. But as she sat there in her small apartment, holding the last connection to her lost son, something changed. And the second hand moved. Just once. A single tick, loud in the quiet room. Then another, and another. The watch was running. Patricia felt ice flood her veins. She wanted to drop the watch, throw it away, smash it against the wall. But she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only sit frozen while the watch ticked steadily, keeping time, marking seconds that felt like they were counting down to something. A knock at her door made her jump. She set the watch on the table, carefully, like it might explode, and went to answer. A young woman stood in the hallway, maybe 30, holding a notebook and looking apologetic. "Patricia Hargrove?" "Yes." "Munt. My name is Sophie Chen. I'm a journalist. I know this is unexpected, but I have been researching unsolved disappearances in the Pacific Northwest, and your son's case came up in my investigation. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions." Patricia should have said no, should have closed the door, but she'd been waiting 16 years for someone to care, for someone to remember, for someone to tell her she wasn't crazy for believing her son was still out there somewhere. She let Sophie in. They talked for hours. Patricia told her everything. On the vacation. Liam's strange behavior afterward. What a drowning in Bayshore. The watch that had just arrived. Sophie listened, took notes, asked careful questions. "Mrs. Hargrove, have you ever heard of a place called the Archive?" Patricia shook her head. "It's a rumor in certain circles. Paranormal investigators mostly, but also some law enforcement. They say there's a chamber deep in Crater Lake, filled with objects connected to missing persons. Nobody knows who maintains it or why. Most people think it's just an urban legend. But you don't." "But you don't?" Sophie hesitated. Mon Ibgen. "I have interviewed people who claim to have seen it. Divers, mostly. But they all recant their stories, sign NDAs, disappear from public view. I can't prove anything, but the pattern is consistent. The people go missing at Crater Lake. Their belongings show up in this chamber. And sometimes, years later, the objects surface again." Patricia picked up the watch. "What does it mean?" "I don't know, but I think your son found something at that lake. Something that's been there a long time, longer than anyone realizes. And I think it's still there." They sat in silence for a moment, the watch ticking between them. "Can you help me?" Patricia asked, her voice breaking. "Can you help me find out what happened to my boy?" Sophie met her eyes. "I can try, but Mrs. Hargrove, I have to be honest with you. Every lead I have followed on this story has gone cold. Every source has dried up. There are people who don't want this information getting out. Powerful people. And I'm just one journalist with a blog and a podcast that 50 people listen to. I can't promise you answers. But you will try?" "Lie. I will try." Sophie left an hour later with copies of photographs, police reports, every document Patricia had saved. She promised to stay in touch, to share whatever she found, to keep digging until she hit bedrock or broke through to truth. Patricia never heard from her again. Sophie's podcast went silent after 3 episodes about Crater Lake. Her blog stopped updating. People who tried to contact her got bounced emails, disconnected numbers. It was like she'd simply ceased to exist. Patricia was alone again with her grief, and her questions and the pocket watch that kept ticking on her nightstand, steady and patient and terrible. She died 2 years later, in her sleep, peaceful by all accounts. The watch was found among her belongings. It was given to Emma, Liam's sister, who was 42 now with children of her own, and a life that didn't have room for mysteries that couldn't be solved. Emma put the watch in a safe deposit box and tried to forget about it. But sometimes, late at night, she would wake from dreams of deep water and impossible depths, and she would swear she could hear ticking from somewhere far away, counting down towards something she couldn't name. The chamber in Crater Lake remained undisturbed. The objects remained in their careful arrangements, waiting. And the thing that lived in the depths remained patient, as it had been patient for thousands of years, as it would be patient for thousands more. And somewhere in the space between what was and what might have been, in a place that existed outside normal time and understanding, Liam Hargrove was still 11 years old, still standing on the shore with a pocket watch in his hand, still watching something rise from depths that should have been empty, still ticking. Near, always ticking. None, waiting for the next curious soul to find the watch, to pick it up, to start the cycle over again. Because some debts are never paid, some hungers are never satisfied, and some mysteries remain unsolved, not because the answers don't exist, but because the answers are older and stranger and more terrible than anyone wants to admit. The pocket watch disappeared from Emma's safe deposit box in 2014. No signs of forced entry, no explanation. It simply vanished, as completely as her brother had vanished, as completely as Sophie Chen had vanished, as completely as dozens of others over the decades had vanished. Last year, a hiker found a silver pocket watch on the shore of Crater Lake, glinting in the sun between volcanic rocks. She picked it up, examined the beautiful engravings, opened the case to see if it still worked. The hands showed 317. The date showed July 19th, 1993. And then, impossibly, the second hand began to move. Tick, wasn't tick, tick, Mecca, tick. The hiker is still missing. The search continues. The lake keeps its secrets, and deep below the surface, in a chamber that shouldn't exist, in a place older than the mountain and colder than death, the collection grows. One day someone will ask the right questions. One day someone will dig deep enough, push hard enough, refuse to accept the silences and the NDAs and the carefully constructed walls of ignorance. One day the truth will surface, but not today. Today the water is blue and beautiful and tourists take photographs and children throw rocks and rangers give tours and life continues, as it always has, as it always will, because some mysteries are meant to remain buried. These, until they are not. Until the watch finds its way to the surface again, ticking steadily, waiting patiently, calling to the next curious soul who can't resist picking it up. And the cycle begins again, always again. May always again, forever ticking. Bon, forever waiting, forever hungry.